Hello and welcome to the Quarterback in Your Life podcast. I am your host, Keenan Reynolds, joined as always by my brother, my agent, my marketeur, Che Mock.
So
It's and Che, we got a special guest today. I am excited. I've been excited all week ever since we got this thing locked in.
me as well. Me as well. You want to do the grace of the introduction?
I will. So to our listeners, we have the NFL legend, Seahawks legend, prolific wide receiver, mentor of mine, Mr. Doug Baldwin.
Wow, that's an
Mm.
intro.
Yeah, I'm not done. You know what I'm saying? Stanford graduate, so you know this brother is educated. So you know any and all opinions coming from this brother will be well thought out and well articulated. Had a very successful career, two-time Pro Bowler, one-time Super Bowl champ, very well paid in his career. You know what I'm saying? We'll touch on that a little bit. But Doug, welcome to the podcast, man. Thank you so much. You're the first official guest that we have, and really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to make this appearance.
Man, absolutely. Jay, Keenan, it's an honor, honestly, to be the first on the show, first guest on the show. I listened to the first one, so I I know y'all coming with some fire and some intellect. So I'm excited about this opportunity. I appreciate it. I really do.
For sure, man. And I know we chatted and we have some things that I want to ask you about, get your opinion on. But before we do that, I know there's probably gonna be a lot of Seahawks fans and maybe just general NFL fans that are fans of Doug Baldwin that don't really get a peek behind the curtain. You know what I'm saying? You're a very private person, and I definitely can respect that. No Instagram, so you're not posting stories every day of what you're doing. When you tweet with a purpose. You're not no mindless tweeting. Everything you say is something that'll make people think. So I kind of want to ask those questions that the average Joe will want to ask you, just to kind of get a view of what it's like to be an elite NFL player, man. And so really the first thing I want to ask is, you know, I mentioned, well paid, but I mean, what was that like? I mean, for anybody that can look up your background, you were undrafted coming out of Stanford. And as a former NFL player, I can attest to the fact that the undrafted player is fighting the odds from day one. And you seemingly beat those odds and even exceeded expectations of, one could argue, many higher drafted players. So what was your mindset coming out as a rookie in the Seahawks organization, undrafted, and knowing all the things that were stacked against you?
I mean, honestly, it was just it was mindless. You get in a situation where you don't. I had no idea what was going to happen. Right, like I showed up to Seattle with one pair of shoes and three change of clothes.
Mm,
Right, like I wasn't expecting to stay for very long, and so I had this mentality that I was just, I had nothing to lose, so I was going to put everything out there that I had, um, and give it my best shot. Now, granted, I felt prepared. Let me not um, downplay that. I did feel prepared because I had a great coaching staff at Stanford. Like my receivers coach, our offensive coordinator, Pep Hamilton at the time was phenomenal.
hmm
David Shaw, who's now the head coach over there now, like I had good people in my corner, right? And Aaron Moorhead was the receivers coach, phenomenal coach. He played in the league for 5 years with the Colts for a while. I owe a lot to them for preparing me for the league. And so, yeah, I went in with kind of just this mindset. I had nothing to lose, but also was very confident in my abilities.
mm. And so as you come in, you make the team. How do for our young, I feel like there might be some young NFL players listening to this, and especially some undrafted free agents. So like you get over the hurdle of making the initial 53.
Yeah.
And so then what? You know what I'm saying? Like what happens then? Because like so much of your time during training camp is like you're trying to make plays, you're trying to do the things in the preseason games to make the squad. And then
Yeah.
once you finally get over that hurdle, it's like you take a deep breath, but then it's like, damn, this shit just getting started. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you learn that really fast because guys, they're up one week and then the next week they're cut. I mean, hell, I was one of them guys. I was up one week and then next week I was cut. So I definitely know that you had to be thinking about that. So how did you battle that? I mean, that's a mental battle that people don't really appreciate when they think about NFL players.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I remember my first my earliest memory of that time was I was sitting in my room with the playbook going over the plays. Like I didn't have the playbook down. You know what I mean? Like but before the first game, I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what is gonna happen when we're in the game, in the huddle, and T Jack calls this play, and it's gonna be the first time I hear this play in a live situation. Like am I gonna remember it? Am I gonna
Mhm.
remember my job? So all that stuff went in my head. And like, I mean it's a very humbling experience because um, I was sitting there with so many of these older guys who had been there, who had experienced it and were kind of just like nonchalant in some ways. And
Mhm.
it kind of it made me realize that there was more to it, right? So
Mhm.
I didn't I didn't kind of get stuck in that mentality of like being scared or being too nervous. I was nervous, but I looked to my left and to my right, and I had some good guys in the room who were teaching me like this is just part of the process. Just enjoy it. And
Right.
so I was able to do that, um, and I had fun with it.
Man.
There's let me and I'll ask a question too, because as a agent, we are tasked with trying to find the right fit and to help the player transition accordingly to the right team. But at the end of the day, there's very limited control in that process. I mean, of course, we can gain or get leverage over the course of the life of the contract, but at the outset, you really don't have a whole lot of flexibility. The team that drafts you, or in your case, undrafted, the team that brings you in and adapts and allows you to succeed, somewhat holds the leverage because the NFL, I mean, the numbers are what the numbers are. 3 years in and you out. I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of the typical role. So at what point, Doug, does that level of insecurity leave you? At what point did it leave you, right? Like where you were like, because you said you were wondering at the outset, man, like, is he gonna call this play and I'm gonna remember the play? At what point were you like, bro, I got this. I'm ready. I got this.
Um, it's funny. I think we were playing the Cincinnati Bengals my rookie season, and I can't remember. I think it might have been Sean Springs. I can't remember who it was. It was an older defensive back that was on our team earlier in the season, right? He was in training camp with us, and I was killing him. I was wrecking him in practice, right? And then he got cut or traded maybe, and so now he's playing with the Bengals, and he's on the right side of their defense. And so we had lined up, and I go out there and I see it's man to man, and something happened. I think it was a penalty or a timeout, and we had to come back to the huddle. And I look at T Jack, I'm like, T Jack, Sean is on me. Give me a go ball. I got this. And T Jack, like as a rookie, T Jack looked at me with confidence, like, all right, go get him. And he threw the ball to me, and I mossed him. I mossed him, and in that moment, as a rookie, as a young cat, like, and I'm feeling it now. Like I was filled with so much confidence, not just
Mhm.
because I made the play, but because my quarterback like trusted me,
Right.
like that rapport and that relationship. And so I guess then is kind of when I felt like, okay, I can have some control in this. But as you know, the NFL doesn't give you any control, right?
Yeah.
And no matter how much they love you up and they say all the nice things about you, they'll cut you in a heartbeat.
It's the
They'll get rid of
business.
you,
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
cutthroat, cold part of the business. So I never really felt safe in that regard. But in my mind, it was like I didn't care. They weren't going to control me. Nothing was going to be different from me. Whether I was with the Seahawks or the Cleveland Browns, I was
Mhm.
going to put good quality, um, tape out there. I was going to put something of quality on the field. And so I always had that confidence in my mindset. And I think that went back to even in college because I had my college experience. Keenan, this. My college experience was kind of rough too. So I had to kind of formulate that persistence and that ability to overcome some of those things. And then, so I was prepared for it.
Yeah, man, you kinda opening some old wounds talking about, the expendability of the NFL, man. It kinda no, but,
We dealt
but
with it.
yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Like you said, it's just a part of the game, and when you accept it and understand it, you're able to move past it. And I know when I got to Seattle in 2018, I really didn't know what to expect when I was meeting you. At this point, you've played in 2 Super Bowls, you got the big contract. I still remember as I was training, somebody was like, "Hey man, you should go watch Doug on film. Like y'all kind of built alike. Da da da. Da. That's somebody you should watch." And I had never even like registered that. And then like literally a few months later, here I am showing up to Seattle, newly signed. I'm like, all right, I'm about to meet Doug, about to meet Tyler, and like the whole the Woots really brought me in, and made me one of their own. So I really appreciate that, and I think that was really due in large part to the leadership that you had in that room, as well as just the culture that had been kind of developed throughout the years that you were there, and some of the OGs that had been there way before me. And so having played in, well, let me back up. Super Bowls, man. Like that's the epitome of the NFL. What was it like playing and winning a Super Bowl? Like you got to touch on that.
Man, everything leading up to it, right? Like it's everything that you can imagine, everything that you think about leading up to the Super Bowl, all the hype, all the pressure, all the thoughts going on in your head, like everything. Like the Broncos one was different, right? Like first Super Bowl, and we were so confident going into that game. Like the practice week before the game, we were flying around. We were so fast. Like you just look on the practice field. There's no way we're losing this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I learned in that was that there's so much X's and O's that goes into it, right? Like I had Champ Bailey, and I knew he's kind of on the downside of his career, so I kind of felt confident just athletically. But then looking at their defense, I was learning so much of the X's and O's, and so you you do all of that work, and then the game ends, and luckily, obviously for us, we won it. And you look around, and you're like, oh, that was it. Like the confetti's falling, and everybody's hyped, and it's dope. But then at the same time, it was like, okay, what's next? You know, and immediately our mindset was like, all right, we have to go do this again. So it was dope in the fact that you had all that experience leading up to it. Obviously they put a whole media thing around it, so that part was interesting and fun to be a part of. But then at the end of it, it's like, I don't want to say that it was empty, but it didn't fulfill something. And so our mindset immediately went to, we have to do this again, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Che, you about to say something?
That's wild. Yeah, I mean, bro, like I think that shows what the mentality of a winner is. I mean, that, like, my man just said, I went to the Super Bowl, and we sort of knew we was probably gonna run that game. By the way, we were practicing in advance of it, and then we got there and we did what we knew we were coming to do, and it still felt a bit incomplete. Bro, that's a competitor. Like I mean, and I think that's what separates sort of like the next level of guys that are in the league, is that they have that mentality of like constant greatness.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an analogy, it's a translation. Like you look at the NBA finals with what just transpired with the Lakers, you know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
Bron been to the top of the mountain, but as soon as he won that thing, it was like, I told y'all, my redeem season, like I told y'all I was going to be here, So, and it's, man, those little things. So that's amazing for me to hear. I know, Keenan, I know your competitive drive and spirit and everything else, having witnessed you in college and then, worked with you and still working with you in terms of how you approach everything. And so hearing Doug say that after going to the Super Bowl, I mean, it translates to just that work ethic that you can't match. So, did you get, Doug, after the Super Bowl, I mean, did you go to the gym the next day? I mean, damn. I mean,
I didn't go to the gym the next day, but I watched film. I watched the entire season the next day.
Are you serious?
Yeah, every game that we played, I watched all of my reps, because I felt like at that point, like everybody's off. Everybody's taking. This is the off season. Everybody's taking off. Everybody's on vacations. Like my goal was, I got to come back more prepared the next season. And Keenan knows this. My mind, and this, honestly, looking back on it, and now is like a 32-year-old adult with 2 children. And I know as an agent, you don't want to hear this, but I honestly felt like it was a disease, right? Like I hated losing more than I liked winning. Like I hated losing. I expected to win. When I won, it was like, oh, that's what we're supposed to do. But when we lost, I had a problem with that, and that ate at me sometimes. So yeah, like the next day I watched all of the film from the season and started watching like, okay, who's next, right? Like who, like, who we're going to start facing, who's going to look good the next year, so I can start preparing for them. Um,
So so let me ask you this. You said something really interesting and you were like, you said it's a disease, right?
yeah,
Where you're so competitive, you want to win so bad that like when you get there, it doesn't you can't even really enjoy it. So, I think a question that some people would ask that I struggle with is how do you find that that center, that stabilization between intense competitiveness, but not to the point to where when you reach that goal, like when you win the Super Bowl, you can just enjoy the moment and you're not worried about well, what's about for the next one. I feel like
yeah,
that's something that I feel like that's a conversation we've had in regards to just coming to work every day, having a mindset of just being free. And I
yeah,
think that's something, at least when in my time with you in 18, I think that's something that you really spend a lot of time kind of teaching a group. So I think as an athlete, as a competitor, that's probably the hardest part because we're taught what you just talked about. And we're taught, you win, you win, you win, you got to keep winning, you got to keep winning. That's just kind of the mentality of the world we live in. I just think it's interesting because it is a blessing and a curse. It drives you to work so hard. It drives you to watch the entire season right after you win the Super Bowl, but it also leaves you like a pit feeling. You know what I'm saying? Even when you get what you work so hard for. So
yeah.
like, where does that fulfillment come from then? If winning doesn't bring it, then where do you find that fulfillment?
I mean, honestly, it's a spiritual thing, and I know that's a controversial statement. A lot of people don't register that, but that to me, that's what it was. It was a spiritual thing. I'm trying to fill this void of affirmation, of love, of really validation of who I am in this world. I'm trying to fill it with these things that that don't last, right? Like I'm not playing football anymore. Like
Mhm.
that feeling of having 80,000 people scream when you score a touchdown or when you do something like there's that feeling is so fleeting and people can get addicted to that, and I think that's what I mean by it's you kind of get lost in that world, and it um it causes you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, act certain ways you wouldn't normally act. It your relationships suffer. Like, my relationships outside of the game suffered in some ways because I was so focused, right? Like when you got there, I was kind of on the latter part of it of learning all of these things and like, okay, I gotta see things differently. And
Mhm.
it I think when I was a rookie in my younger years, T-Jack and Sidney Rice, they really tried to tell me that, right? They tried to show me that, but I couldn't see it because I was
It's
just
hard.
so it's so hard. And really, and I don't know if, this is just from my perspective. I don't know if there's a way to be successful at that level consistently and dealing with the business side of it and not have that mindset, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to have that mindset to survive in that world, at least in my case. And I think
Mhm.
it's very pointed because Derek Jeter, when he retired, they asked him like if he could go back, what would he do differently? And he said he would enjoy the wins more. He would just enjoy the process more. And I thought about that too, but I think like when you're in it, you can't do that because if you do, then you're not focused on the next obstacle. If you kind of get relaxed a little bit. So I don't know. It's just for me, it was never I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a lot of you think about the coaches in the locker room after we win, right? The number one thing they say is like, "All right, we did that, but we haven't done anything yet."
Right.
Like will enjoy it for, but when we get on the plane, we're looking at such and such. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the culture of highly competitive sports. So I mean, again, I really agree with you. I think you have to be that person that's just always looking for more, but also I don't know if it's even possible finding that spiritual balance that you talked about. And we had many a conversations about that balance and really just identifying yourself outside of that as a player. And I think that particular statement is a great segue into for you the transition into life after ball, how you were able to go from a world where you, like you said, you got 80,000 people screaming your name, wanting your autograph, praising your every, reception and touchdown to now it's just Doug the family man. You know what I'm saying? And then now you have to move on to this new life that you've never really been a part of. Like how do you deal with that? You know, how was that transition for you?
It was hard. I was probably in a depression for at least 8 months. At least 8 months, I was in
Mm,
a deep, dark depression. Um, and I don't even know, like that time was just, I don't even know how I got through it. I mean, I know how I got through it, but I don't remember. Right, there was so much going on. It was just so much negativity. Like it just felt like a black hole of time, of space that I don't really remember how, what happened in that time. I knew I was in a depression. My wife obviously was a key part in keeping me healthy. At the time, I also, like, I retired. Well, no, my daughter was born, and then 3 days later, I announced my retirement. So like I had no time and space to kind of absorb that and deal with that. I was immediately into fatherhood.
right.
Um, and so, going to see a therapist twice a week, right? Like I had multiple therapists that I was seeing during that time. So it was hard, and again, I think it goes back to my previous statement. Like I was so focused on that world, trying to be successful in that world, that I didn't develop the auxiliary stuff around me, right? And so when I left the game, I wasn't really prepared. I thought I was prepared, but when you leave the game to that degree, when everything, like your whole identity is wrapped around it, like, I didn't know who I was outside of the sport, right? And I didn't want to, nothing against other people who jump into, like, going into broadcasting or sticking with the game. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to find myself outside of the game, because I knew that for me and for my children and for my wife, I needed to do that.
Hmm.
Um, just because I knew how addicted I was to it. So it was hard. It was really, really hard. But I'm at a much better place now. Much better place.
That's amazing, man, and really
You know,
appreciate.
I think, and it's it it's so from a business standpoint, it's so great to hear that drive translated into sport, especially for me as an agent, obviously, because my drive, my life is business and sport, and merging the two together. But I also have a dedication to my craft, whatever I'm doing, the same way, of being willing to be addicted to it.
Yeah.
Enough of an addiction, and I think Keenan, one of the reasons that we were wanting to do this Quarterback Your Life podcast was just like, you know, he has a knack for being great. And, a part of his transition to the next phase of his life was, you know, navigating what it means to leave the NFL and go start a real world job. And you Doug, are talking about it, from a perspective of having retired at 32, like realizing that that addiction is gone, but for you to cope with leaving it, it takes a level of acceptance and sort of recognition of, all right, what do I want to be?
Yeah.
And I think it draws so many parallels to all the things we're talking about and going to be talking about, I think, in these conversations that we're going to have, Keenan. Um, and I can say that for the listener, I can appreciate from a business perspective, and I know there's probably many people out there that are listening that are business owners, so entrepreneurs, who are like, yo, I get that addiction. And I can just say that it parallels it. Sometimes it might sound as if it's, people perceive athletes to be in this sort of different dimension of reality because they got money and success and 80,000 people screaming. But at the end of the day, I mean, either you're
Still a
driven or
human.
you're not.
Still human.
Still
Yeah.
human. Yeah.
Yeah, and all great points made. And Doug, we really appreciate your candor talking about the way, the depression, the therapist side of it, because that's a real thing. And again, to Chase's point about feeling like athletes are in a different dimension, when you talk like that, like that's the average person can relate. And Jay, to your point about the entrepreneurs, the entrepreneur probably feels similar to the way you felt, just trying to find, like, who am I outside of my business? Like, how do I dedicate my craft, dedicate my life to this business, but not be consumed by its every move, and it's such a delicate balance. And again, Doug, you talked about finding yourself outside of football. And one of the things that I noticed about what you do outside of ball is you're very passionate about social justice, about all the very current issues that me and Jay are not afraid to tackle on this podcast that are relevant. And you show how you are more than an athlete, and you show that you can be educated, you can be a fiery competitor, and also care for your fellow human. And one of the things that I think was so representative of that was your dedication to getting that law passed in Washington. So
Mhm.
if you could please elaborate on that, because I feel like that is amazing. Like people talk about protesting, talk about charity, they talk about donating their time, but to actually affect legislature in the state that you live in, I don't think there's any bigger thing that a person can do to show that they care about a certain topic. So I'm not well versed on the law, so really please educate us on what it was, why you were so interested in it, and that whole process for you.
Yeah. So I before I even kind of dove in, it was Initiative 940. Um, and so I had done multiple conversations with the training commission here in Seattle. So you know, we're one of the few states where if you become a law enforcement officer, you have to go to one training. It's one training facility, and it's up here in Renton, right? And it's like you every law enforcement officer that then goes to whatever part of the state, they have to come through this one facility, which is unique. And so I was able to go there and just talk to the people who were teaching and training the law enforcement officers, right? So I got to know them personally, and I went there probably 7, 8 times just to talk with them, build a relationship, and really get to understand from their perspective, like what is going on, you know? And so I learned what they do in training. I learned like, what's the mindset? Like, trying to put myself empathically in their position when they have to deal with violent situations, a threat to their own livelihoods, right? Um, and so what I came away with that was that, at the end of the day, again, to Shay's point on the earlier comment, we're all human, right? We all just want to go home to our families at the end of the day. But there are some holes that are missing that need to be filled. And one of them was just like de-escalation training, right? Like I know it sounds foreign, and I know, a lot of the pushback was like one of the things that 940 pushed for was law enforcement officers have to have mental health services. They have to, be trained in mental health and also see mental health therapists.
Makes
And
sense.
and one of the officers that I talked to, he pushed back on that, and he said, I don't think people in the clinic or in the hospitals know more about mental health than I do when I'm out there seeing these people all the time. And I was like, I get that. I get that you have a real world experience, but that real world experience also has an impact on you as a person. And so it's not just your knowledge about how these people are responding, it's also about looking inside of yourself and seeing how this is impacting you. And so Initiative 940 forced, I shouldn't say forced, but mandated that, mental health become a priority for law enforcement officers as well. And it included de-escalation training. It also included that, if you're on site and you see somebody who needs first aid, the officer is now charged with administering first aid, which they weren't before, right? Which baffles me too. Um, but kind of the more important part of the legislation was that um, we were one of the few states in the country that had the Malice Clause in our statute. And what that means is that you couldn't prosecute or bring charges on an officer unless you could prove malice, right? Which is premeditated murder, essentially, which is impossible
Yeah.
because an officer puts on a gun on their wayside every morning when they go to work or at night when they go to work. And so you can't prove that. And so even in egregious cases where, something clearly was not right, there was no accountability. And so to change that, we got rid of the malice clause, but we also added in a good faith definition of what it is, how you're supposed to act in these situations, which it wasn't clearly defined before. So that initiative did all of that, right? We got some pushback, but I think the pushback was people didn't actually read what the initiative was. Once
Right.
they read it, once the training commission understood it, like they were all, I shouldn't say they were all, but most of them backed it and understood what it was really trying to do. And so, yeah, we got that passed, and now it's law in state Washington.
Man, I want to be like Doug when I grow up, man. That's that's some real shit for real, dude. Like, I think about two things you talked about: the mental health piece, dealing with mental health, having to deal with those situations that get kind of out of hand. we've seen multiple examples of officers not dealing with mentally ill people effectively, and it resulted in catastrophic consequences.
Right.
So you're addressing that with that law, which I think is amazing. And then on the other hand of that, the de-escalation piece is so important, because a lot of conflicts and situations kind of, I feel like, that become national news, that are tragedies, lack that piece. They're just skipped over that. Like, they just hop right into use of force.
Yeah.
And then finally, the first aid piece. No longer do you let somebody lay in the middle of the street, injured, wounded, fatally or not. You have to do what you can to save their life. And I think we could all agree that we've seen examples of that not happening to people that were, critically wounded by an officer's use of force. So you're addressing these problems, man, and it's not enough for you to just talk about it. It's not enough for you to just tweet about it. Like, you actually boots on the ground, going, talking to the people that train the officers. And another word you used that I really loved was empathetic. And that's something that I think we could probably make into an entire podcast topic in and of itself. That empathy piece. I think it's lacking in our world, and I think that could be a catalyst, or that is the catalyst for the problems that we are currently experiencing today.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely.
So, kind of going off of that, the law enforcement, the law that you got passed, we see a lot. We saw, I think, during this pandemic, a lot more national attention on what professional leagues are doing to advance social justice initiatives. The NBA with their bubble really, I think, took the most progressive stance, if you will, on how they feel about social justice. I mean, you watch the finals and you see Black Lives Matter on the court. Like, what I'm saying, 10 years ago, does that happen? You know what I mean? I think that the pandemic in and of itself created that. Like, I don't think it's new that people are, protesting. I mean, we saw it with Cap early in 2016, and there's been multiple athletes that have been leading the charge in the social justice way. But I think the pandemic shut everything down. So now the only thing on TV, there are no movies coming out, there are no sports games. The only thing you see
Couldn't hide.
is an officer with his knee on a black man's neck. That's
Yeah.
all that you see on there. That's all that's dominating the wave. So now it's become a national conversation, and it's been pushed to the forefront. And then when you go watch your NBA games, NFL games, to get your relief or your entertainment from a long day at work, they remind you of these social injustices and the systemic racial oppression that people of color experience. So I really want to hear your take on what the NBA and the NFL has done during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think it aligned. You've spoken out about it on Twitter, but for those that don't follow your Twitter, I think they would love to hear what is Doug Baldwin's educated opinion on these matters.
Well, regardless if it's educated or not, it's still an opinion. So I'll leave it there. But you know, I, I think it's very easy for um it, it's easy for me to get wrapped up in the emotion of it all, right? Like, because, and especially with George Floyd, like I hadn't cried that hard since my grandfather passed away.
Mhm.
Like 8 minutes and 46 seconds, this dude had his knee in George Floyd's back. And my wife cried because, like, she's like, what if that was you, or if that was our children? Like, like, and so I'm putting all this together, and I'm thinking, like, if my mom saw that, if that was my mom that I was crying out for, like, and that's not to say that all these situations are the same. And I think, we have to be very clear about that. Not all of these situations are the same, but a lot of these situations, I feel like, looking at them from, a third party eye who's not privy to all the training and all the information, but just looking at it, something doesn't look right. Something doesn't feel right. And I don't know if it's, just training or what, right? Like, it an interaction like that should not end in the death of somebody when somebody's knee is in the back of this man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Mhm.
You know, like the one that I think that really kind of struck a chord with me was the Tamir Rice case. You know, like and I the one of the officers who was involved in that, like I watched his interview and he just started crying, like he was, you know, and sometimes we forget that these are also human beings on the other side of these situations.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I try not to get too caught up on one side because I want to be empathetic and I want to see it from the other side. But I also think like, okay, well, what's the solution? How do we fix these problems? You know, the Tamir Rice case, the Philando Castile, like that broke my heart.
Mhm.
Breonna Taylor broke my heart. Like in regardless of the information or the details, like we have to do better. We have to do better. Like and this is you're talking about a profession that involves dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. If it was a doctor, right? And a doctor like made a mistake or was killing people at
It
you
wouldn't
know,
be a
like
doctor anymore.
wouldn't be a doctor, right? And granted, I know that the amount of money they make is different, right? Which is also a conversation that could be had. But my point is that I think, you know, you can't look at these situations and say, "Oh, well, that's just life. That's just how it happens." No, like we can be better. We can be better. We as a human population on this planet, we've always evolved to be better in whatever capacity, whether it's in sports or technology or in societal systems in general. And I think this is no different. And why can't we put so much emphasis on that as well when it involves human life, right? And I think that's we forget that at times. This is human life, and if we could, you really have to feel it emotionally so that people can, you know. And I don't know. I just my emotions is getting riled up now, so I'm gonna stop there.
No, man, listen, you know, I appreciate the rawness. This is the side of you that I wanted to kind of, you know, show people, you know, and we alluded to it earlier in our podcast, but I got to know you in 2018, got to see the type of person you were, got to see how you felt about these things. We had many a conversations on the porch or on the balcony, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Eating the Philly cheesesteaks. So you know, I really I just as I was thinking about how we built out this podcast, Shay, I was like, there's no better person to bring on than Doug to give just straight, candid, raw views, man. And you know, I really appreciate everything you've done for me. I really appreciate you being boots on the ground and advancing these initiatives. You inspire me to want to actually do something and not just sit on here and shoot the shit with my agent. You know what I'm saying? Like I want to go out and actually have an effect on these things that kind of rile me up emotionally. So you know, I know you're a busy man. You got two babies at home that want to hang out with their father. So man, we appreciate you on this podcast. And man, I can't wait to hear the finished product.
I appreciate you having me. That can't be the end though.
Oh, you got some more you wanna touch on? Listen, man, the floor is yours.
I
We
like
can
it.
talk
I
about
like it
whatever.
because I,
Yeah,
I was saying we let it slide a little bit. We can keep going on now.
Yeah, man. I was trying to get you out, you know what I mean? But shit, if
I
you
mean,
got
I,
some
I got a I got a 6 o'clock, but you know I can text them and let them know I'll be a little bit late. No, I did, you know, when you asked me to come on, obviously I had to do my research. So I listened to the first podcast, right?
Mhm.
And man, like y'all were touching on, and I know it was after the debate, and y'all were touching on so many things that I had wanted to talk about, right? And so I haven't talked about them, right? Like I
Mm.
said a couple things on Twitter, but it just, you know, there's never been, I don't think there's been appropriate space for me to share my thoughts. And like I wanted to comment on some of the things that y'all said. Like, I don't know, do we have the time? Do we have the space for that?
We absolutely got the time, and
Hell yeah.
I was sitting there thinking, can you gonna let this man get off here without giving him the opportunity, platform
I don't want y'all,
to
I
tell us
don't
how
want
you
y'all to
really
become
feel?
I don't want y'all to become a political platform, but man, like,
Man, we spin that real. I don't give a damn political, sports, music. We spin what we feel, how we think. So you absolutely got the platform to say whatever the hell you want to say, man.
And let's qualify it though a little bit because I think I know some of the things that I mean, present day, man, we got an election coming up,
yeah,
and we're not going to parse this via politics, but there's a lot of things going on. So I'm gonna speak to something I saw today, and I want to see, and I feel privileged I have the ability to ask Doug Baldwin this question and ask Keenan Reynolds this question. So I saw Dan Rather tweeted today, and I grew up as a kid on. I'm not that old, but I mean I remember the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather, right? I mean that's like there was a time in our lives where there was only a certain amount of channels. You had respected anchors that would see things and they'd speak to how they felt, and the world sort of listened to those anchors because they got that form. And now we have so many media outlets and social media and everything else. You get different levels of interpretation. But I saw Dan Rather tweet today. He said, I would not characterize the fact that people are waiting in lines for hours to vote as voter, what was the exact terminology used? As voter excitement. I would characterize it as voter suppression
100%.
in America. You know, why the heck is somebody having to go wait hours in line to vote?
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear, you know, sort of some of the things, the dog whistling, some of the things that are going on. I mean, you know, we got to call space. Like, where are we? Where are we in this landscape, Doug? And how do we go from where we are to where we need to be? And I'm not talking about who we elect or any of that stuff. I'm talking about just as people. You talked about spiritual. You talked about emotion. Like, just how do we get there? And how do you feel on some of these topics?
Man, like this could be a whole nother podcast. I'll try to be brief on this, but you know, just I bring it back to like what I was taught in sports, like on the fundamental level, right? Not the NFL where it becomes more of a business, but more so on the fundamental level, where a team is trying to get together to accomplish a common goal, right? Like, hold on, I gotta pull this up because this is more so like a thought process of what it means to actually be a part of something like society. Like we're all a part of society, right? Each part makes the body whole. To survive, each part has a role, but to thrive, each part forms a soul. And I think our collective soul in this country and quite frankly, like globally, I think we're going through a depression right now, socially, right? We don't know what our identity is as a society. And you know, you can say whatever you want to about Donald Trump, left, right, wrong, indifferent, good, but we have not been this divisive and this divided in this country in a very, very long time. And I can't help but point to the one thing that's been different, which is Donald Trump. So let me back up and go all the way back to the debate. You know, it was awful. It was awful.
Sad.
In a number of ways. It's very sad and it's embarrassing for this country, right? And I think y'all touched on it. The thing that did stick out to me the most is that when you are presented a softball question, can you denounce white supremacy? Give me a name. Give me a name. Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. Now, look. Listen. Let me clarify. Me and my family, we condemn white supremacy, and that's how easy and it should have been for him to say that. Simple English.
Simple.
It's simple English. I condemn white supremacy, and I think you said it, Che, on the podcast too. If it was somebody who was black supremacy, I condemn that as well.
Absolutely.
Any hate, any disrespect in that form, I condemn it. It should have been easy English, and the fact that he was unable to do that, it regardless of his policies or what other things he may say he believes in, I don't believe him. I don't believe him. I don't trust him. Because to me, it's the same. Like, if you're abusive to your wife, you can't be a good father. You can't be, right?
That's deep.
Can't be. If you're abusive to your wife, you can't be a good father. So if you're a racist who can't condemn white supremacy, don't tell me that you care about lives and that you're pro-life. Don't tell me that. You're not. You're not. Because and I'm sorry. I know that's a whole other debate.
Listen, man. No, dog.
So
speak your mind, man.
The subjective versus the objective. I mean, like, and Doug's, you know, drawing in both, right? But like objectively, what he said And what Doug, or the lack of what he said, objectively, it speaks to
volumes.
It speaks volumes. And so then how we interpretate that subjectively based on the context of the circumstances, then either you've got to objectively overcome that with your words and or your actions. But exactly to Doug's point, when and I'm this characterization does not, let's qualify, does not just lie with Donald Trump. A lot of people can be guilty of this. But when you are at the highest level of power in the entire world, there are just layers of um, uh, of impressions and or of just sort of thought processes that you have to go through in order to lead effectively. And it is mind-boggling and it is troubling. And so I'm glad we brought it to the forefront to have the conversation, because there's so many things. And you're right, Doug, we could have a full podcast about this stuff.
And I would play devil's advocate. I'd say, okay, let me look at it in his defense, right? Maybe he wasn't prepared for the question. Maybe he stumbled over the question. But his response was, stand back and stand by. It makes no sense to me. It really, okay, I want to move on from that. So the Pence and Kamala Harris debate, right? That to me was equally, I mean, I love Kamala. I think that I think she's much needed in this political space right now. But I was kind of disappointed in some of her answers. Number one, like she didn't give an answer on packing the court, right? And I wanted to bring this up because you mentioned, Jay, about voter suppression. And I think this ties in directly into voter suppression. So packing the courts, right? I wish when she said, well, let's talk about packing the courts. I want to talk about packing the courts. I want to talk about the 200 plus federal judges that Trump has appointed in his 3.5 years as president, right? Like, yes, there was a lot of federal judge seats open when Obama left. And I'm thinking maybe it's because he didn't want to pack the courts, right? But Trump is packing the courts right now. And I don't know, is packing the courts different than ramming the courts? Because right now we're ramming through a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
Right. Which has implications for her lifetime. Right. And so I don't know. I felt like she missed an opportunity to, and I'm sorry, I'm getting all worked up about this. Like
you should.
But it's like when we talk about packing the courts, he has put in 200 plus, close to 300 federal judges. Right. And I know the Supreme Court gets all the attention, but these federal judges, they make decisions that impact our lives more closely to the common people than the Supreme Court does.
100%.
Right? And for instance, in Florida, when they passed that law that allowed 1.4 million former felons to vote, right? I absolutely 100% agree with the legislation that should afford them their right to vote, right? To have an impact, a say in how our country is formed. Five Trump appointed judges on the lower circuit courts changed the law to where they had to, the felons had to pay all of their fees and fines before they could vote.
Voter suppression.
Unreal.
That's what it sounds like.
Unreal.
Trump appointed judges did that, right? And so now, and so the argument is like, well, is that a poll tax? It's absolutely a poll tax. It's absolutely a poll tax. These people are free. They have served their time in jail, and now they are out. They are free, and they are supposed to be able to have the right to exercise their voice. And now you're telling them that they have to. And then now there's some issues with, because there's people, Bloomberg and LeBron are out trying to pay these fines for these people. But then now there's like, well, are we allowed to accept the money from somebody else that's not them?
Wow.
Okay. All right. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, listen. To me, that sounds. I'll just say this much. Number one, I just learned something in your response, Doug, that I didn't know about the packing the courts situation. Number one. Number two, just hearing that for the first time, like my mind went immediately to the idea of voter suppression that Jay brought up. That kind of sparked that thought process that you had. Also, I will say from that the view of voter suppression, I saw several things on Twitter as well today, Che, about people waiting. I think Jonta Austin posted a video. He's like, we waited 11 hours to vote early, not on election day, not at the last minute. We waited 11 hours to vote as soon as we could. That voter suppression. And another thing that I hit is like that really bothers me is when the leader of our country calls for people to poll watch. That bothers me as well, because I feel like
Terrifying.
that is regardless of if there are good intentions behind it. Like, first of all, I just feel like it's just a recipe for conflict, whereas people are exercising their constitutional rights to go cast their ballot for whomever they decide. They should be able to do so peacefully without having somebody trying to asking if they've already submitted a ballot or whatever the poll watcher is supposed to do. There are people that volunteer to run the polls, and those are the people that should be the quote unquote poll watchers. There should not be extra people that have nothing to do with the voting system coming in and trying to make sure that things go as smoothly as possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, voters that voter suppression, and I think we touched on it in our past podcast, Che. It really bothers me. Like, it really makes me angry, because I feel like it should be easy. You should be able to cast your vote peacefully without having to wait an entire workday to get it done.
And when there's a less than 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% instance where there's any case of voter fraud that's been found, and when every Secretary of State in the entire country almost will come out and say unequivocally, we've never had an issue of voter fraud, to draw doubt in it. And then, in my opinion, to say to someone who's a racist organization to stand back and stand by and say we need people to turn out and be poll watchers.
Weaponized them.
Weaponized.
Weaponized them.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he did. He weaponized them.
So it is it's there's so many things that speak to it. I hope that and here's the thing is that when Keenan and I talked about these issues as it pertain to the debate and just what's going on in the country, he and I very candidly said in our first conversation about it was that it seems like Trump's been given so many opportunities to win, or to garner at least enough public support to win the states that are necessary to win the election. Even with the sort of vile and vitriol and hate that is sometimes spewed from his mouth, and it's mind-boggling to say, like, man, bro, like you know that you are offending so many people by not being able to just objectively say, hey, look, I don't support any racist organization, or any organization that is seeking to oppress black people, oppress white people, oppress anybody. But
unless you support them too.
There it is, and so anyway, the other analogy, and just because we brought this up, and I'll say this, and then we can transition, however, and I would love to hear more conversation pertains to Doug. But you talking about packing the courts, and packing and rushing in Supreme Court justice, and how the parallels, sort of one and the same, and somewhat hypocritical. But there was a 30-year trend of increasing diversity, bench diversity, over federal judges getting put into place. Of the 200 plus that Trump has put on the court, fact check me on this, but I believe it was one was a person of color, was a black person, which is astonishing to me. So, and that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean that those other 217 weren't qualified. Yeah. But when somebody shows you who they are, believe them.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I remember hearing you say that on the previous or the first episode. When they show you who they are, believe them. Yeah. But also, like you said, a hard head makes for a soft behind. And I'm a Christian man. I believe, I believe that history repeats itself. You know, in biblically it says nothing is new under the sun. And I say that because like people don't see it. They don't see what I feel like is completely obvious. I had a lady tell me, "Well, I don't think Trump's racist." Okay, well, can you define to me what racist is? Because clearly we have a different definition of what that means. And at this point, it's like I feel like the people are just it's a cult like mentality, and I worry about these people who follow him because I feel like they're so low on on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that something needs to be done. Right, like we are missing something in our society where people are so dug in on their position of supporting somebody who the like you said the vile and vitriol that comes out of his mouth. Like, how do you not see the hatred that he is riling up and that he is leading, and you support that? And I don't understand why. I don't understand how you don't see what he's doing. And I don't know, it's confusing to me, it's mind-boggling to me. And honestly, it's also very scary in some ways. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I like history. A while ago, I was doing some leadership consulting, and I studied leadership. I studied every form of leadership. I even studied Hitler because he was a leader. He came to power, and I wanted to know how he did it. What are the similarities so that I can make sure that I know the difference. And if you look at how Hitler came to power, the things that he did, the things that he said, the way that he um, manipulated their government. I'm not saying that it's the parallels are there, but it's there's some eerie similarities in that. And also what Putin did not too long ago, less than a year ago. There's some eerily similar tactics to it all. And I just hope that there's enough checks and balances in place to make sure that this man does not destroy our democracy in that way. Again, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist. I'm just, as a concerned citizen for America and for my children, and again, biblically, nothing is new under the sun. History repeats itself. And I hope that we haven't become complacent as a society enough to allow somebody to manipulate our system to then become a dictatorship and then change our entire way of living. Again, not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but that's just, it's scary. It's a scary thought. And I have a lot of history teachers that I know who have done the same thing, who study the history in this way, and they feel the same way.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, man, I appreciate the perspective, and I think when you can base, uh, when you question the way things occur, and then you can draw parallels to the past and to other dictators or those who were opposed to democracy, etc. And then you can see the analogies towards just spewing hate that rouse up people enough to, oppress or keep the power structure the way it is. It's it is scary, and I think it is tough to have conversations, and that's really where, for me personally, that's where I really am disgusted the most, is that the discourse has become so tough and
Yeah.
difficult. Like, and I told Keenan this, I think I said on one of our first podcasts, I said, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I miss Bush Republicans.
I do too.
Um, like, I miss them, and like like truly miss, and I like my best friend, and when I was in college, was a Bush Republican, die hard, and we would have conversations like that were about differences of opinion related to like things that matter to us, not about whether or not our president was a racist. Like, that's crazy to me
Yeah.
that I have to have that conversation. And that, like, if someone were to ever, and on the other side, if somebody would come in and said, like, 8 years ago, like, or 6 years ago, whenever, any time period over the course from 8 to 16, that they thought that Barack Obama was a racist, and they could give me any type of factual evidence to support it at all, or ever have him say something like that, then I would disavow it and say, man, that's all right. Yeah, I'm gonna call a spade a spade. The man might be, but I mean, it's not even a parallel, and that's what's just so disconcerting to me. That's where I really get sort of fearful, and And then you see all those parallels to dictators and things of that nature. And so, we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks. I just hope that I also hope that change comes about in a positive direction for America, regardless of whether or not Trump wins. Obviously, we've discussed why we think maybe there could be a better candidate, but I hope that we can get some type of energy to really change this discourse and change the tone, because it's getting scary. And Keenan, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah.
Well, I want to. I know Keenan said this on the podcast too on the first episode. He said that I don't think Biden is that great of a candidate either. I don't. Honestly, I don't. But yeah, I'm not naive and so dug into a position where I'm going to choose the devil I know as opposed to the devil I don't. I'm not like that. It makes no sense to me. It makes no
Mhm.
sense to me. And look, I play the stock market. Like my portfolio has done well, if I'm being honest. But there's something more than just making money, right?
Mhm.
You have to have an ethical, moral compass. And when a man stands on the national debate stage where not only Americans are watching, but the globe is watching, and you cannot condemn white supremacy, I don't care how much money you're making me. It's not okay.
Yeah.
Not okay.
That's real, man. And 2 points that I want to kind of make, and I think these will be good enough for us to kind of wrap up in. Number one, Che, you talked about Bush Republicans, and the one thing that I thought about when you said that was you had the conversation with your roommate, and then or your best friend,
Yeah,
and
my
then
friend who's a news anchor now, but when we were in college at the time, we just we I was I had less independent thought than I do now, because I didn't have the life experiences to help me formalize more independent thought. So
Mhm.
I just sort of fell in line, which some people do. They fall in line to an ideology, which I hope that anyone who listens to this podcast will go out and do their own research. Don't let someone tell you how you wake up and feel tomorrow.
Yeah,
Understand facts. Understand, that like we're not this isn't red Alabama versus blue Navy. Like this isn't, what I mean? Like this isn't a football game. This is real life. And so people gotta stop embracing stuff like we're playing a sport in politics. Like you can't just
yeah,
justify. But anyway, so
yeah, yeah.
that person, that's who that was in
Yeah, but
context.
you really kind of made my point for me. So you could have a conversation and then you guys go on about your day. Or you could
Yeah.
see a Bush Cheney somebody could wear a Bush Cheney hat and you just kind of look at it and keep it moving. But now it's kind of taboo. Like if you find out somebody, I'm not past judgment, but if you find out somebody's a Trump supporter, like I feel like a lot of people are kind of like giving them the side eye, or you see a Trump Pence flag, waving. It's just a completely different sentiment where it's almost kind of the thing that we talked about before, not to belabor the point, um, Che, but it's kind of that tribal mentality. And that's where I think the problem is resides. So, making that point, one thing that I've thought about listening to you talk, Doug, and the things that you've done, the opinions that you have, I really think you should pursue
No,
a career in
no,
in
no,
politics, man.
no.
I knew I'm telling you, man, like we need more leaders with empathy. And it's clear to me as I listen to you talk and as I've spent time around you that you are a leader with empathy. That you could be highest paid receiver on the team and talk to a practice squad player like he's a human being and relate to the things that he's going through. Those are the kind of leaders that we need running our country from from state legislature all the way up to the top of the totem pole. So I will leave our listeners with that bit of information about Mr. Doug Baldwin, regardless if you agree, disagree, want to fight him after this, love him after this. It doesn't matter. I think that we can all agree on the point of the type of man this person is. And you have definitely blessed our podcast by coming on and being our first official guest. For real, man. For real.
I appreciate you saying that. And the reason why I say no is because I like I got I got my children to focus on, my family to focus on, right? And like I wanted to make sure that I was in a comfortable place, if not have already left the game before I had kids so I could focus on my family. And I think that's most important. Now, I will also say that I don't know if I'm cut out to be in politics. And because like I'm not gonna hold my tongue if I feel a certain way about something, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm gonna say it. If I have to go back later and apologize for it, I'm okay with doing that. But I always am gonna wear my heart on my sleeve. And with
That's
that
what we
being
need.
said,
But that's what we need in
I mean,
politicians.
I feel like Trump wears his heart on his sleeve.
But the two differences, number one, the empathy. Number two, you just said you don't mind going back and apologizing and admitting when you're wrong. And
Yeah.
that's where I think the difference is. People respect an honest opinion. People respect people putting out what they really feel. They respect the raw, the authentic. But something to be said about someone that can admit their faults. They can admit when they're wrong. They can admit when they misjudge. And that, my friend, is what I think differentiates the people, the real leaders from the pack.
And let me say this to end on a lighter note. Doug, you couldn't be president anyway. You know why?
Why?
Because you're 32 years old, man. You're a young man. All right. But I'll tell you what, man, to the listening audience, anybody who's heard this man talk and thinks that 32 years of wisdom doesn't define and create someone who's a special human being, then they haven't been paying attention. But I make that joke saying you got to be 35. For those of you who didn't know, you got to be 35 to run for president. So don't write in Doug. But damn it, I can't say anything other than I agree with Keenan in saying that, man, that was so much of what you said, man. It speaks genuinely from the heart. It speaks from empathy. It speaks from a level of selflessness. It speaks from a psychology of and desire to want to not only better yourself, but to better other human beings and other people. And man, kudos to you and thank you so much. I reiterate things that Keenan said and obviously let him close out. But I can't thank you enough for being our first guest on the podcast. It means the world to us. So that's all.
I appreciate it. And Keenan, man, like I appreciate you inviting me onto your podcast. Like I know this is your thing, and so I appreciate you trusting me to come on, and um, I'm grateful for that. And anytime, anytime.
For sure, man. You definitely set the bar. You set the bar for the rest of. Now I gotta really make sure that whomever I bring on from here on out has to have whatever we're talking about. Doesn't have to be just politics. We talking money. We talking, whatever, music, movies. You gotta have a very well thought out opinion because the bar has been set. So again, man, thanks. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to yet another episode of the Quarterback in Your Life podcast. I am your host, signing off.